You're watching The Game Masters, how they rose from nothing to control the rules of the world, the brutal, secret, and often dark journeys of those who built empires from absolutely nothing. Jack Ma, rejected by life, ignored by the world. Jack Ma wasn't born to win. At least, that's what life seemed to tell him from day one. Born in Hangzhou, Communist China in the 1960s, he grew up surrounded by poverty, restrictions, and a world determined to make him believe he had no value. From a very young age, he was seen as weak, clumsy, and useless. His teachers said he would never amount to anything. His classmates laughed at him, and the world simply ignored him. The scars started early. Jack was terrible at math, a major flaw in a country where academic success is almost a life sentence. He failed tests. His grades were a running joke. While other students followed the traditional Chinese educational path, Jack collected failures and disappointments. It was as if the entire universe was programmed to shove him into the loser's drawer. But life didn't stop there. At 20, Jack was rejected from 30 different jobs. Yep, 30 doors slammed in his face, one after another. He was even turned down for a job at KFC. 24 people applied, 23 were hired. Only Jack got rejected. Not even good enough to serve fried chicken, apparently. Each no felt heavier, crueler, as if fate wanted to crush him slowly, without mercy. Even so, Jack refused to accept that this was his story. Something inside him burned, a mix of revolt and hope that even he couldn't explain. While the world said, "You're not good enough," he silently repeated to himself, "I'll prove them wrong." But no matter how much he believed, results just wouldn't come. Life kept tightening those invisible handcuffs, chaining him to mediocrity. Jack tried to learn English, one of the few things that seemed to make sense for him. Every day, for years, he'd go to a hotel where foreign tourists stayed. He'd give them free tours just to practice the language. People thought it was weird, pointless. After all, what future could a skinny kid with bad grades, no visible talents, and an obsession with a language nobody spoke in his town possibly have? From the outside, Jack Ma was the perfect picture of failure. Poor, skinny, rejected, hopeless. A statistical error. But what no one knew, not even himself, was that beneath all that pain, something indestructible was being born. A resilience that would one day turn this humiliated kid into a man who challenged governments, corporate giants, and write one of the most unbelievable stories of the modern world. Time passed, and Jack Ma started to wonder if the universe really did have a personal vendetta against him. After so many slammed doors, he decided to try for university, and true to his life so far, he failed. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. 3 attempts, 3 public humiliations, 3 brutal reminders that he just wasn't good enough. But fate, sometimes ironic, gave him a tiny break. On the 3rd attempt, he was accepted into one of the worst universities in the area, a college no one really wanted to attend. It was almost as if they were saying, "All right, you got in through sheer persistence, but only because there was a spot left." Even in failure, Jack seemed to be a privileged loser. And the humiliation didn't stop at the university doors. Inside those classrooms, he continued being the mediocre student, the one who never shined. His classmates aimed for traditional careers, engineering, finance, tech. Jack chose to be an English teacher, not because it was a burning passion, but basically because it was the only thing he could do without failing miserably. He graduated, became a teacher, and for a while it seemed that would be his ceiling. A simple job, low salary, 0 prestige. Society saw him as just another one of the millions who would never escape the Chinese mediocrity assembly line. For most, that would have been the end. Fate accepted. life resigned. But there was a restlessness inside him. Something didn't fit. Jack didn't want to accept the cheap script the world had written for him. He began to realize that if he wanted something different, he couldn't play by the rules. The same rules that had crushed his dreams since childhood. He realized with scary clarity that he was absolutely useless at playing the traditional game of skills. But what if? What if there was a different game? One where creativity, vision, and courage mattered more than diplomas, grades, or IQ. That thought started to grow, quiet, dangerous. And little by little, Jack Ma began to plan his escape from the invisible prison the world tried to trap him in. It was on a trip to the United States in the 90s that Jack Ma first encountered something that, at the time, seemed like pure science fiction: the internet. When he entered a tech lab in California and saw those screens connecting people, information, and businesses, his brain basically exploded. That wasn't just a network of computers, it was a window to a world no one in China even imagined existed. Curious, he did his first web search. He typed the word China, and to his shock, nothing came up. Zero. The most populous country on Earth, with thousands of years of history, simply didn't exist on the internet. It felt like an invisible punch to the gut. In that exact moment, Jack had a brutally clear vision. If China wasn't online, someone needed to put it there. But how? He didn't know how to code. He knew nothing about technology. He was a broke English teacher with no money, no influence, no connections. Everything screamed, "This isn't for you, Jack." And yet, something inside him said the opposite. For the first time, he saw an opportunity where no one else did. A microscopic gap between the impossible and the inevitable. He came back to China carrying more than just suitcases. He brought an obsession, a fever, an idea that wouldn't let him sleep. He tried to explain the internet to friends and family, but no one got it. They laughed at him, doubted him, called it madness. "You're wasting your time with this computer thing? That's useless, Jack." Even so, he ignored everyone. He started his first internet business with friends, pretty much as amateurs. And, as usual in his life, it failed miserably. The project collapsed before it could even walk. But Jack was getting dangerously used to failure. Only this time something was different. He'd smelled the future, and he wasn't about to let it go. It was in that initial collapse that a decision was born, one that would forever change his life and the history of global commerce. Jack Ma wasn't willing to just watch the future happen. He was going to build it himself. In 1999, Jack Ma locked himself in his tiny apartment, gathered 17 friends, and gave a speech that sounded straight up insane. With shining eyes and a voice full of urgency, he said, "We're going to create a company that will change the world. And if it goes wrong, at least we tried." The looks he got were a mix of fear, doubt, and, maybe, faith. But no one really knew what they were getting into. With no investors, no government support, not a cent from the outside, Jack put together his craziest idea yet: an online platform to connect small Chinese suppliers with the global market. The name? Alibaba. A simple name, but loaded with meaning. Just like in the tale of Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, Jack believed the internet could be a magic password, the open sesame, to unlock the doors of commerce for millions of forgotten small businesses. But the market didn't find any of this funny. People said it was ridiculous. "Chinese people don't trust the internet," they said. "No one will buy from strangers online." Even the banks refused to help. Jack went door to door, tried for loans, sought investors, and all he got were laughs. No one, absolutely no one, believed in him. To make it worse, the Chinese government viewed the whole thing with suspicion. Internet? Online commerce? That sounded dangerous to a China that was still closed off and wary of anything coming from the West. Jack Ma knew that, beyond beating the market, he'd also have to outsmart censorship, bureaucracy, and an entire system that didn't want change. But there was one brutal advantage nobody noticed. While big companies chased wealthy clients, Jack was looking at the small guys, the invisible ones, the forgotten ones. He knew better than anyone the pain of being rejected, ignored, and underestimated, because that's what he'd been his entire life. And so, with sheer stubbornness, guts, and almost suicidal courage, Jack and his 17 friends started building, brick by brick, the empire that would soon shake not just China, but the entire world. In those early years, life inside Alibaba was controlled chaos. There were no fancy desks, no comfy chairs, no boardrooms. It was a makeshift office, cramped, no air conditioning, no luxury, no comfort at all. But there was one thing overflowing in that place: hunger. A wild hunger to prove that the impossible could be done. But the real world has no mercy for dreamers. The bills piled up. The money disappeared. Sales? Almost none. Employees started panicking. Some cried, others gave up. Failure seemed inevitable. Jack Ma, who had become a pro at collecting no's, now watched those same no's pop up inside his own company. The pressure was suffocating. Families questioned. Friends drifted away. The media mocked. And the competitors? They laughed out loud. No one believed that a bunch of amateurs in a tiny apartment with zero experience in tech or finance could challenge the giants of commerce. And in the middle of this psychological and financial meltdown, Jack had to make one of the toughest decisions of his life: fire people, cut deep, look those who believed in him in the eye, and tell them there was no more money to pay their salaries. According to Jack himself, it was one of the biggest pains of his journey, and it left scars that would never fade. But even so, he didn't back down. No matter how many times life crushed him, Jack Ma always got back up, skinnier, more broke, more battered, but standing, always standing. Because deep down, he knew a simple, cruel, and powerful truth: failure doesn't kill you. Giving up does. When everything seemed to be falling apart, something absolutely improbable happened. A group of Silicon Valley investors heard about this crazy Chinese guy who wanted to build a global commerce platform. They flew to Hangzhou, walked into that sweaty, cramped office, and were shocked. There was no cutting-edge technology, no luxury, just people absurdly obsessed. Jack Ma didn't show fancy graphs, didn't pitch with magical numbers. He did what he'd always done, told a story. I'm not building a company. I'm building the future of global commerce. If you want to get rich quick, leave now. But if you want to make history, have a seat. That sentence hit the room like a punch to the gut, and, against all odds, they said yes. A big check arrived. Oxygen was back. For the first time, Alibaba could breathe. But along with the money came an even bigger war. Competitors now realized the project had spun out of control. Giants like eBay, Amazon, and Yahoo started eyeing Alibaba like predators. From that moment on, a silent, brutal digital Cold War began, one that would last for years. Jack knew he couldn't beat them at their own game. So he did what he'd always done: invented a new game. While eBay bet on commissions, Alibaba offered sellers free space, making money off ads. It seemed crazy, and maybe it was. But it worked. Once again, the world thought Jack was digging his own grave. And once again, they were wrong. The year was 2003. A new threat was on the horizon: eBay. The American giant landed in China with unlimited money, cutting-edge tech, and an aggressive strategy. They didn't want to compete. They wanted to crush, to wipe out any local competitor like blowing out a candle. And guess what? The target was clear: Alibaba. eBay's execs laughed. To them, that failed English teacher with weird ideas wasn't a real threat. But Jack Ma understood something the Americans couldn't see. They didn't know the Chinese people. They didn't know how they thought, how they bargained, or what pains they carried in daily life. Jack gathered his team and dropped a line that would become legendary inside the company. eBay is a shark in the ocean. We're a crocodile in the Yangtze River. On our turf, we win. It was more than a metaphor. It was a declaration of war. And the plan was as bold as it was suicidal. Jack launched a new platform called Taobao, giving sellers something eBay never imagined: everything for free. No fees, no commissions. They bet on volume, community, and trust. And while eBay scrambled to react, Taobao grew like a weed. Fast, wild, unstoppable. The battle was bloody. On one side, billions of dollars and all the corporate arrogance of the West. On the other, a gang of Chinese maniacs who simply refused to lose. And in the end, the impossible happened. eBay didn't just lose, they were forced out of China. Defeated, humiliated. That day, Jack Ma didn't just prove it was possible to take on giants. He proved that sometimes the improbable not only happens, it devours the impossible alive. The victory over eBay was a glory, but also a curse. Jack Ma and his team were no longer the underdogs, the outsiders. Now, they were on top, and being on top means one thing: everyone wants to take you down. Competitors appeared by the thousands, media pressure ramped up. The government started watching with new, suspicious eyes. Behind the spotlight, the atmosphere at Alibaba became unbearable. Employees who used to celebrate every tiny win were now lost in the mess of inflated egos, internal fights, and identity crises. The dream was turning into a corporate nightmare. Jack began to realize that, to survive, he'd need to change not just the business, but the company culture. He gathered his team and gave a speech no one would ever forget. If we keep acting poor, we'll think small. If we start acting rich, we'll die. The message was clear. The hunger that brought them this far couldn't die. But while he fought inside, outside things got complicated too. The Chinese government, wary of the internet's growing power, began to put up barriers, censorship, limitations, rules, and every single one of those rules seemed handwritten to make Alibaba's life harder. Plus, new titans were rising in the market: Tencent with WeChat, JD.com growing fast. The war Jack thought he'd won was just beginning. And this time, there was no manual, no map, just an unknown road full of traps. And in the middle of this storm, Jack faced a harsh truth. Sometimes winning is just the beginning of your next defeat. The question now was simple, brutal, and inevitable. Could he take it? Unrestrained growth brought an invisible but devastating enemy: psychological burnout. Jack Ma, the man who defied logic, started to fall apart inside. Sleepless nights became the norm. The pressure of leading thousands of employees, investors, governments, and a hungry market became unbearable. He was at his limit. What the world saw was a smiling businessman on stage, giving speeches, getting ovations. But away from the spotlight, Jack was exhausted, isolated, emotionally wrecked. He began to question everything. Was it even worth it? How far did it make sense to go? He'd won every battle, but now fought an enemy he couldn't see: himself. Inside the company, problems exploded: scandals, accusations, lawsuits, shareholder pressure. The sense that everything could collapse at any moment was suffocating. Jack realized that the biggest threat to his creation was no longer the market, nor the competitors. It was success itself. And in this moment of internal collapse, he made a radical decision. He had to disappear. step away, reconnect with what mattered, because if he didn't, nothing would be left. Not Alibaba, not Jack Ma, not the future. He vanished, traveled, isolated himself. And in that forced silence, a new vision started to emerge. For the first time, Jack understood Alibaba could no longer be just a company. It needed to become an ecosystem, something that could live on without him. When he returned, he wasn't the same. The smile was still there, the inspiring speech too. But something had changed. Jack was no longer a man fighting the world. Now he was struggling not to be swallowed by the empire he built. Success had brought an even more dangerous enemy, the Chinese government itself. Jack Ma, with his irreverent voice and rebellious spirit, started to annoy people he never should have annoyed. Public speeches, where he subtly criticized China's financial system, were the spark. And for the first time, Jack realized he'd gone too far. In 2020, it all collapsed. The much-awaited IPO of Ant Group, Alibaba's financial arm, was simply canceled by the government. Overnight, more than $37 billion vanished. It would have been the biggest IPO in global history until it wasn't. And then, Jack simply vanished. No one knew where he was. He didn't show up at events, in videos, or in interviews. The whole world started to speculate. Was he arrested? Did he run away? Had he been silenced? The man who challenged the world was now a victim of his own success. Meanwhile, chaos ruled inside Alibaba. Investors panicked, shares tanked. The government started imposing increasingly severe regulations as if to send a clear message. No one is bigger than the party. But Jack wasn't the type to die quietly. After months away, he reappeared. Thinner, quieter, more restrained. His speeches changed. The irreverent tone gave way to caution. He understood the rule few dare to challenge. In China, you can be rich, powerful, influential, but never forget who's really in charge. And so, the man who challenged billionaires, governments, and statistics now fought to save not just his company, but his own freedom. Under relentless siege, Jack made a decision that seemed impossible to anyone who knew him: resign. Step down from the empire he himself had built. In 2019, he officially announced he was leaving the role of CEO of Alibaba. But no one knew at the time whether this was a strategic retreat or a silent ultimatum. On stage, his farewell was triumphant. Lights, applause, emotion. But behind that smile, there was pain, frustration, because deep down he knew he was leaving not just by choice, but because the system had made it clear: either you step aside, or we'll make you. Jack tried to act light. He said he wanted to devote himself to philanthropy, education, the youth, that he wanted to inspire new generations. But the truth is, the man who spent decades fighting the impossible was now being forced to learn how to live without fighting, without the stage, without the microphone, without the battle. But even out of the spotlight, his shadow was still enormous. Every decision at Alibaba, every move in the Chinese market, still carried the weight of Jack Ma's name. The empire he built had a life of its own, but it would never be the same without him. And the question lingering in the air was cruel. Was it worth it? Was it worth challenging everything and everyone only to be silenced in the end? Or maybe that was always the price of being great, too great. The man who was once ridiculed, discredited, humiliated, was now saying goodbye, but left a legacy even the system couldn't erase. The name Jack Ma is not just a name. It's a symbol, a scream, an open scar in the history of global entrepreneurship, because he wasn't the smartest, nor the most prepared, nor the most talented, but he was without a doubt the one who refused to give up the most. The boy rejected from 30 jobs, who failed his school exams, who was called useless, became the man who built the biggest e-commerce empire in Asia. Today, Alibaba is not just a company. It's an ecosystem involving retail, logistics, tech, cloud, AI, financial services, and more than 1 billion users. Jack Ma redefined what's possible. He proved that you don't need money, connections, or luck. You just need an obsession, an unshakable conviction that, while others say it's impossible, you can make it happen. But Jack's legacy isn't just business. It's a brutal lesson about the limits of ambition, power, and freedom. A lesson that says, without sugarcoating, winning comes at a price. And sometimes, that price is you. And even far from the spotlight, his name still echoes in every entrepreneurship classroom, in every mind that refuses to settle for mediocrity, in every young person daring to dream of defying logic, the system, and destiny itself. In the end, Jack Ma is not just the story of a billionaire. He's living proof that the impossible is just an opinion. If you like this story and want more real tales of resilience, vision, and the wild side of success, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Got thoughts about Jack Ma? Drop them in the comments. Your next breakthrough might start with just one story,